Murder in the name of the law. Are you backing up your ideals? If you are opposed to capital punishment, what are you doing about it? Are you taking an active part in the battle against that statute which forces the employees of the state to do murder for you? There are two forms of sin. The sin of commission is the doing of that which is wrong. The sin of omission is the failure to do that which is right. Those who advocate the abolishment of capital punishment yet do not personally interest themselves in the many ways whereby the individual can help to remove this blight from the state are guilty of committing murder by indifference. Californians, wire your senator and representatives to support the Felon Bill. Now is the appointed time to realize and to act. Do not permit your indifference to do murder. Capital punishment is legalized murder. The Felon Bill, a corrective. The Felon Bill, recently introduced in the state Senate, is a direct effort to remove from the statutes of the state of California the stigma of legalized murder. Under the provisions of this bill, Section 190 of the Penal Code is amended to read as follows. Every person guilty of murder in the first degree shall suffer confinement in the state prison for life. Every person guilty of murder in the second degree is punishable by imprisonment in the state prison not less than 10 years. Senator Felon's bill, as representative of the most progressive humanitarian sentiments of a civilized commonwealth, deserves the unqualified support of every man and woman far-sighted enough to realize the profound influence which it will have upon the future of the state. The abolishment of capital punishment marks a great milestone in the civilizing of civilization. Honorable Harry L. Davis, former governor of Ohio, in an article published in the Outlook of July 26, 1922, explores the theory advanced by advocates of capital punishment to the effect that there has been an increase in homicide in those states where capital punishment has been removed from the statute books. He says, in part, however, there are today 8 states that have no death penalty: Maine, Rhode Island, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, Kansas, North Dakota, and South Dakota. They have had no capital punishment in from 9 to 75 years. Homicides in the first 5 have averaged from 1915 to 1919, 35 for each million population, according to New York World Statistics compiled by F. L. Hoffman of Newark, New Jersey, while in 25 capital punishment states, for which such figures are available, the homicide average during the same period is shown to have been 84 for each million inhabitants. It is interesting to note that the state of Maine, which abolished capital punishment in 1887, has the smallest homicide rate in the United States, whereas California, where the death penalty is enforced, according to tables compiled for the years 1920 to 21, has the second highest homicide rate in the Union. Let us first consider briefly the 5 popular arguments advanced by advocates of capital punishment as adequate reasons for the execution of a convicted murderer. 1. Capital punishment effectually removes the possibility of a repetition of the crime of murder by the same offender. By separating the murderer from contact with the community for the rest of his natural life and depriving him of the privilege of parole, the Felon Bill effectively disposes of this problem without compounding the crime of murder. 2. Life imprisonment is a burdensome expense to the state. This objection is overruled by the fact that a criminal incarcerated for life can be made self-supporting. What is more, any individual who is so selfish as to countenance the execution of a fellow human creature to save the infinitesimal pro rata of prison expense necessary to keep a man alive is himself a menace to the community. 3. A man who has murdered another human being deserves to die. This statement, so often made, is in direct opposition to the Christian religion, the accepted faith of the American people. It has been declared by Christendom that the Mosaic law of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was superseded by the doctrines of Jesus Christ, who taught that forgiveness was the greatest of human virtues. No Christian can advocate capital punishment and be true to his faith. And no community can call itself Christian that deliberately murders even the most erring of its members. If the teachings of Christianity are not applicable to the problems of law, then they must fail as a code for the guidance of our people. 4. The murderer has always been executed. Why change the system? We desire to change the system because the system has failed. We no longer live in the Dark Ages, but in what we claim to be civilized and enlightened times. Let us efface forever from our statutes capital punishment as a modern survival of primitive barbarism, ignorance, and savage cruelty. 5. The moral example of capital punishment discourages crime. The fallacy of this argument is apparent to all who read the daily newspapers. In spite of the fact that over a period of many centuries, tens, yes, hundreds of thousands of murderers have been burned, hung, decapitated, electrocuted, and asphyxiated, the number of murders increases with amazing rapidity. If capital punishment discourages crime, how did the commission of crime survive the reign of King Henry VIII? For while this sovereign sat upon the English throne, 72,000 people were publicly executed for 240 minor major offenses. In his work, Capital Punishment, Clifford Kirkpatrick, Ph.D., produces evidence to the effect that the moral example of capital punishment is not a deterrent to major crime. He writes, "The death penalty may be an actual suggestion to crime. A boys' club in New York agreed to stand for 2 minutes in the honor of 4 gunmen who had died game." Passing on to a consideration of the causes of murder, we find that the criminal is, in many cases, the victim of circumstance or environment. If we would successfully combat crime, we must destroy the cause of crime. Not only must we make the path of the transgressor hard, but we must make the path of transgression unprofitable and uninviting. The dope peddler selling his wares on the steps of the public school, the bootlegger distributing poisonous liquor throughout the community, parents neglecting the moral training of their children, the congestion of great cities where millions are huddled together, many with improper food and clothing or hygienic advantages, the grinding wheels of industrialism, literature unfit for the minds of the youth who read it. All these are powerful factors in the fabrication of the criminal. Modern civilization is permeated with crime. Gold is supreme and its accumulation the prime motive for living. The criminal is actually the personification of the criminal instincts of the race, the murderer the personification of the murderous instincts of the race. Man is but thinly veneered with respectability, but is still a savage in his own heart, and occasionally someone, unable to control his innermost urges, commits in actual life the very crimes which thousands of others commit in their hearts. You may continue to destroy the occasional malefactor who comes within the grasp of the law, but you cannot destroy crime until you destroy selfishness within the hearts of human creatures. Crime is as old as the human race. It is in the blood and bone of every creature. It can never be beaten out of man, nor will his death destroy it. The only practical solution of crime is education. Not only the education of the intellectual faculties, but education in moral value sense. The child must be taught the value of human life. The finer and kindlier qualities, now ridiculed, must be unfolded and nurtured. The realization of the value of constructiveness must be woven into the fabric of American youth. Every so often the world is drenched in the blood of a great war in which the intellects of the human race vie with each other to create more terrible instruments for the annihilation of their fellow creatures. On the field of battle, thousands of lives are snuffed out in a single second. Shells, gas, and liquid fire sweep across the face of the earth, directionalized by so-called civilized and cultured nations. What is the inevitable reaction? Man becomes careless as to the value of human life. What is one person more or less in the midst of a holocaust of shrapnel? All over the world, the value of human life has depreciated. Man's inventions grind him to pieces, and every day the papers are filled with casualty lists from accident, fire, and plague. The result is that the impressionable youth, The useful citizen or criminal of tomorrow grows up surrounded by examples which distort the mind and produce various forms of bias that, if sufficiently emphasized, become criminal tendencies. The penal institutions of this country contain many men and women who, while possessing brilliant intellects, have in their natures peculiar mental or moral kinks, which were not controlled and thus became the dominating influences in life. A morbid disposition and unhealthy attitude toward the problems of life, attempts to shirk the responsibility and labor of providence, all these attitudes develop into distinct criminal expressions. Obsessed by his attitudes, the individual seeks to force the world to accept his own standards and then curses society that finds it necessary to isolate him in self-defense. It has recently been scientifically established that the criminal is actually a sick man and crime a disease both infectious and contagious, which permeates the entire fabric of an individual until it destroys all the constructive tissues. All living creatures contain the germ of this disease, but fortunately only comparatively few permit the disease to gain the upper hand. Disease is not limited to the body. In fact, the most deadly diseases are not those which attack the physical members. They are diseases both of the mental and moral natures, which, while outside the cognizance of material science, are being explored and catalogued by highly specialized types of intellect, such as the alienist and the psychoanalyst. The prison must be looked upon as a place wherein the morally and mentally sick are quarantined until their ailments have been diagnosed and a proper treatment applied. There is no doubt that a certain percentage of mental and moral disease, now called crime, can be effectively treated, and the sufferer returned again as a useful member of society. The mere recognition of crime as a disease will do much to remedy present conditions, for efforts will then be made to find a cure for the criminal, whereas up to the present time his detention has been considered sufficient. Every prison should have on its official staff an alienist, whose duty should be the continued study of the factors in the individual which caused and perpetuated criminal impulses. When a man is physically sick, the medical fraternity attempts to cure him and will use every effort to keep him alive, even if fully aware that a permanent cure is impossible. The ethics of the profession demand that every patient shall breathe just as long as it is humanly possible to keep breath in the body. On the other hand, when a man is morally and mentally sick, that is, a criminal, the law either confines him without proper curative treatment or, if he be considered incurably sick, hastily executes him, thus effectually removing all opportunity to study his condition and any possible chance to cure him. Victor Hugo summarizes this aspect of crime in the following noble statements. For what, then, do I ask your aid? The civilization of penal laws, the gentle laws of Christ, will penetrate at last into the code and shine through its enactments. We shall look on crime as a disease, and its physicians shall displace the judges, its hospitals displace the galleys. Liberty and health shall be alike. We shall pour balm and oil where we formerly applied iron and fire. Evil will be treated in charity instead of in anger. This change will be simple and sublime. The criminal codes of the future will be more humanitarian, for they will be devoted to the transmutation of crime rather than the extermination of criminals. The same energy and cunning which make a dangerous criminal, when redirectionalized into constructive channels, result in a valuable and industrious member of society. The antiquated exterminative measures employed to check crime have completely failed in their purpose, as evidenced by even a superficial consideration of present criminal conditions in America. Even a child realizes that while crime of murder is a most serious offense, a second murder on the part of the state cannot possibly improve the situation. For while there was one person dead before the execution, there are two persons dead afterward. The first individual is not restored to life by the proceeding, nor has justice been satisfied. The citizens of a state who employ officials to perform the necessary murders required under the law of capital punishment are themselves instigators and accessories to the crime of murder, but they are too cowardly to personally supervise the crime which they sanction and commit by proxy. It is the voter, and not the executioner, who is responsible for the death of the murderer. The executioner is merely the hired representative of the people, and no individual has a moral right to advocate a law which he is not personally willing to enforce. Therefore, no individual has a right to advocate capital punishment who is not personally willing to cut the cord which holds the trap door of the gallows, or close the switch which turns the current into the electric chair. How many of the prosperous, peace-loving members of a community could be found who would volunteer their services for this task? Albert Hubbard advances the theory that just as long as the state sets an example of killing its enemies, individuals will occasionally kill theirs. He makes the following comments on the attitude of ex-President Fallières of France regarding the death penalty. Among the pleasant duties of the presidents of France is that of signing all death warrants issued in the Republic. This is well, President Fallières says. However, that should be a slight change in the arrangement. To wit, the judge who sentences the man to die should also act as his executioner. President Fallières knows full well that if this were the case, it would do away with legalized homicide. He says, "I will not ask another man to do that which I myself am unwilling to do. I will do no murder, even for the state." We no longer live in the day of swashbuckling buccaneers who fought on street corners over trivialities and murdered as a legitimate form of amusement. Nowadays, many people turn pale at the sight of blood and reach maturity without ever having seen a person die. We are not cruel as a nation, and those who have once witnessed an execution never went to behold another, because the tragedy which takes place behind the gray stone walls of a prison is hidden from our sight, and we are not brought face to face with the effects of our legislation. We thoughtlessly permit laws to remain upon our statute books, which we would quickly eradicate if we personally contracted their savagery. The restoration of the medieval system of public executions might be an effectual solution to the problem of capital punishment. The townsfolk of the Middle Ages were so accustomed to behold death and were so entertained by the spectacle of public hangings that they even held their children up above their heads so that the little ones might behold all the ghastly details of the crime. But men and women of the 20th century, unfamiliar with such forms of cruelty, would be horrified and sick at heart as they watched the deliberate, systematic, and intentional process of destroying a human life. We feel that the reaction from a revival of public executions would forever destroy capital punishment among the American people. We would also suggest that a scaffold be erected in the midst of every city square, the tall arms of the gibbets an ever-present reminder of man's inhumanity to man. Such a sight would be nauseating and revolting to the finer sentiments of the people. And yet, if we advocate the hanging of a man, why should we hide the process behind gray walls and barred windows? If it be right to hang him at all, it is right to hang him in the public square, where, according to the advocates of capital punishment, the moral lesson would be all the more impressive. Let all those who advocate the extreme penalty be forced to attend each and every execution. Place them in the front row, where they may watch the minute details of the agony they have advocated. Let them remove the black cap from the condemned man's face, that they may the better see him die. Then from the ranks, let one be chosen, the foremost defender of the system, the man who shouts, "Let the murderer die." He shall be the one to spring the trap that sends the convicted man gasping and struggling into eternity. A spectacle of this kind brought home to the citizens of the states would result in each member of the community desiring forthwith to wash his hands of any further part in the guilt. He would then assist in that nobler work of devising a better and more constructive method of solving the issues of major crime. Furthermore, we have no right to demand of our public officials that they shall commit murder for us. The destructive effect of an execution upon the morale of a prison is profound, as all realize who have come in contact with that phase of the problem. The elimination of capital punishment will cause a great sigh of relief to go up among those servants of the people who, in the fulfillment of their duty, must participate in all the ghastly details of the execution. S. Hobhouse and A. F. Brockway, after a careful investigation of the effects of capital punishment in English prisons, concluded, "Evidence of the bad effect of executions upon both the staff and the other prisoners is unanimous." See report of the Prison System Inquiry Committee. To the governors of those states which still enforce capital punishment, please go every day from the friends and relatives of condemned men, asking for gubernatorial clemency and seeking to present new and exonerating evidence. The state executive is placed in a most difficult position. The law demands the death of the criminal. The jury has convicted him, and in order to commute the sentence, the governor must override the judgment of the court. In a certain sense, the executive himself must become a lawbreaker in order to give expression to that quality of mercy inherent in the hearts of all true men and women. The substitution of life imprisonment for the death penalty would solve this problem by eliminating these painful situations. It seems unnecessary and unnatural that the supreme executive of a state must break the law in order to show mercy. Another element rarely considered is the fallibility of the jury system. There are instances of judicial error in which the wrong man has hanged, and afterwards the actual culprit confessed. Former Governor Davis of Ohio states 5 instances where men convicted of major crimes were later found innocent. He adds, "There are many other cases on record where innocent persons were saved from the death penalty by fortuitous circumstances. Likewise, where it is certain innocent persons have been executed. While the records of these instances are few, there are many more unknown cases where justice has miscarried. In the face of this ever-present possibility, the substitution of life imprisonment for the death sentence has a decided advantage. For while capital punishment is irrevocable and once administered, the state can make partial amends if the parties concerned are still alive. The most flagrant examples of judicial miscarriage arise from the practice of inflicting the death penalty upon accessories to the crime of murder, upon the weight of circumstantial evidence alone, or upon juvenile offenders. The Marquis de Lafayette, an outstanding figure in early American history, recognizing the possible miscarriage of justice, said, "I shall ask for the abolition of the penalty of death until I have the infallibility of human judgment demonstrated to me." The rapid progress which the modern world is making in scientific discovery is a further consideration. As we have already suggested, we know comparatively little about the true nature of crime, but considerable thought is being turned in that direction with the hope of solving the riddle of criminal impulse. We are seeking to discover to just what degree the criminal is a victim of circumstances, just what part heredity plays in the problem, and whether or not crime is a form of insanity, in many cases possibly due to the misfunction of glands, nerves, or organs. There are many persons today suffering from incurable diseases who are living in hourly hope that science will discover the cure for their malady before the disease destroys them. If we imprison the murderer for life, human progress may discover before the end of his life the cure for his disease. The American people are not cruel at heart, and if the criminal can actually be assisted, the majority of people will be willing to help him. Therefore, we recommend to your consideration the substitution of life imprisonment for capital punishment, with the hope that in the years to come the solution to the problem of crime may redeem the criminal at least for himself, if not for society, and that he may not be hurled out into oblivion without every effort on the part of his fellow creatures to assist him in the remaking of his own character. Life imprisonment has been said to be more cruel than the death sentence. This then should satisfy those who advocate cruelty. In any event, we believe that life imprisonment will have a tremendous moral effect upon crime. The average murderer expects to pay with his life for the life he has taken. He may even conclude that what he has gained by the crime will more than balance the few minutes of agony which he himself must suffer. On the other hand, if the man who commits the crime realizes that he will have to spend the rest of his natural life behind gray stone walls and iron bars, separated forever from the world of which he was a part, doomed to be alone with his thoughts for many long, weary years, We believe these considerations would take much of the glory and braggadocio out of the criminal. Most important of all, however, life imprisonment may have a profoundly constructive effect upon the mind and soul of the prisoner. We are still more or less concerned with what lies beyond the grave, and it is something for the criminal to make peace with himself and his God. This he may do if he is imprisoned for life. He may grow within these prison walls to become a truly beautiful soul, accepting his fate, realizing the immensity of his offense, and living to redeem, at least in part, the better side of his own nature. There are records in the prisons of such effects actually taking place in the lives of those condemned to remain for the rest of their lives within the gloom of the penitentiary. While this may not seem to the average individual as an important consideration, not one of us is in a position to fully realize how important the remaking of the life of an individual may be in that great unknown which stretches out beyond the grave. We are not sentimentalists on the subject of capital punishment. We believe the criminal should be adequately punished and made to realize the enormity of his offense against society. We do not advocate opening the prison doors nor transforming penal institutions into places of amusement. But we do believe that the mere huddling of men together will not redeem them for society, nor prevent the recurrence of the crimes for which they have been incarcerated. A number of foreign governments have been successful in curbing their criminal classes without the infliction of capital punishment. Holland abolished capital punishment in 1860, Italy in 1889, Portugal in 1867. In Russia, the death penalty is only resorted to in cases of treason and resistance to the government. There have been no executions in Finland since 1826. And none in Belgium since 1863. In Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, there is only about one execution for every 20 death sentences. In some cantons of Switzerland, there have been no executions in 50 years. In Germany, only about 8% of the convicted men have been executed. In Austria, only about 4%. These statistics would indicate that it is possible to maintain law and order without resorting to terrorism in the form of legal murder. It has been very satisfactorily proven that the stricter the penal code, the less crime we have, and that where justice is deferred, crime is rampant. The startling amount of murder in America in comparison to other parts of the world is the result, to a certain degree, of the American penal system, and if capital punishment be abolished, its place must be taken by a rigid enforcement of other existing statutes. As time goes on, the human race will undoubtedly evolve more efficient, more intelligent, more adequate methods of coping with the criminal. But until such is the case, the only way whereby he can be controlled is by the realization that whether he is a millionaire or a pauper, whether he is a rich man's son or a poor man's son, whether he has pull or no pull, the law is inflexible. If he breaks the law knowingly, he must compensate to the state by his liberty. If the felon bill is to take the place of capital punishment, and it can do so and be successful in every respect, it must mean that 10 years imprisonment is 10 years imprisonment, and that life imprisonment is life imprisonment. The laxness in our laws is responsible for much of the crime from which we suffer. The parole system, while in many cases useful, all too often defeats the ends of justice by permitting the criminal to be released upon society when only a portion of his sentence has been served. Enforce all laws to the letter, and life imprisonment will be found an adequate substitute for the death penalty. But be lax with other laws, and even the death penalty itself is ineffectual. Being in constant touch with large groups of people representing the thinking classes of the various communities in California, we presented the question of capital punishment and its abolition to groups of people in the three largest cities of California: Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Oakland. The result of the votes taken was very interesting and most gratifying. In no case was pressure brought to bear. An outline of the principles involved was alone presented. Before our own congregation, the Church of the People in Los Angeles, we took the first of these interesting 3 ballots. There were 2,000 persons present. A hand vote was taken, and not one hand went up as being in favor of capital punishment. At the Scottish Rite Auditorium in San Francisco, the second-hand vote was taken in a packed house of 1,600 persons, and only 7 hands were raised in favor of capital punishment. In Oakland, in the Ames Shrine Pavilion, the third-hand vote was taken, and out of 900 persons, only 10 hands went up in favor of capital punishment. This means that out of 4,500 people approached, only 16 were avowedly in favor of capital punishment. These people, representing no particular party or faith, for all our work is interdenominational and nonpartisan, we feel to be representative of the true sentiments of the people of California on the question of abolishing capital punishment.